see every day above ground. You never know when your life will go done. Whether you're rich or poor, the wicked penman will give you one more.
Good afternoon and welcome to Engage with Success Radio Show 317, Diverse Thinking and Why It Should Be Celebrated. And today we're going to be talking about the dangers of hive mind and only hiring people you personally like as opposed to their competence, and the truth about only hiring people that don't rock the boat. I'm Jo Dodds, your host for today. I'm an engagement consultant working within the Engage with Success core team. The Engage with Success movement is an inclusive movement committed to the idea that there is a better way to work by releasing more of the capability and potential of people at work. We spread the word about employee engagement and shine a light on good practice, and we're widely supported across the UK, involving the public, private and third sectors. If you go to our website, engagewithsuccess.org, you can use the link at the bottom of the page to join our newsletter list and all our social media links. So my guest today is Jay Mullings, screenwriter, director, founder of Written Mirror Limited. Welcome, Jay. Great to have you with me.
Hello, Joe. Thank you for having me.
Lovely. So just telling us a bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll sort of dig into the topic for today.
No problem. My name, as you've already heard, is Jay Mullings. I'm an multiple award-winning writer and filmmaker. I own Written Mirror Limited, which I run myself, and I'm a two-time published author of the Thought Book series, Thought Book 1 and the Thought Book 2. That's the most, I guess what you would call my skill set when you round it all up is is a content creator. I'm able to go from the full distance from ideation to written ideas to photography, filming, editing, the whole 9 yards plus sound, music and the rest of it. So yeah, content creator is probably the best way of summing up what I do.
Lovely, cool. So we're going to be talking about hive mind and about the sort of people that you recruit and how that works within organisations or doesn't work within organisations. What about, before we start, the connection you have with organisations? So I'm presuming you create content for organisations. What are the sort of connections?
That's correct. Creating content, editing content, coming up with solutions to problems, issues, or ways of disseminating messages. So, at best, I'm a storyteller. So if you think of any type of issue a company might have in terms of communicating either within or externally, it normally boils down to how a story is related to other people. That's usually where I come in, and that's where my expertise lies in.
Lovely. So today we're talking about the dangers of hive mind and only hiring people that you like rather than to do with competence, and also about hiring people that don't rock the boat. So let's start talking about what hive mind is.
Hive mind essentially is where you get there's like this one central idea that everybody holds, and anyone who doesn't hold this, this central idea is seen as, evil or almost, to be seen to be like disrespectful or not holding the same core values as the other people because they don't share this idea. Hive mind is essentially when one idea is all that's allowed to permeate the group. Everybody must follow and, dance to the beat of this drum and nothing else. No one should ever question anything outside of it. No one should ever wonder. Everyone should just blindly follow. That's what essentially how I see hive mind, essentially.
Yeah. And that could be sort of seen as the sort of the negative side of thinking about company culture and sort of having one vision for your organisation, because if you talk to organisations about what they're here for and what they're doing, then there's often a discussion around what could be perceived to be that sort of hive mind issue, but it's positioned in sort of positive, this is what we need sort of terms. So where is that difference? Where's the difference between having a real positive sort of future that we're all aiming towards the same thing, as opposed to we're all sort of stuck in one type of sort of mindset, I suppose?
So what you said, what I thought was quite astute when you used the word culture, because that seems to be what people use to justify this kind of closed-mindedness to any other types of ideas. So they use the word culture a lot, which is it can almost serve as a double-edged sword. Culture is important in terms of everyone being on the same page, but it's also it's a bad thing when it's used to outwardly, leave behind anyone who thinks about doing things differently. And I think that's the difference between all wanting, a positive outcome for something, or moving forwards positively, and then just blindly following one way because that's all someone has ever known. We're all capable of learning from other people and evolving, and I think that is the danger of kind of hive mind, and then that's where you kind of draw the line between culture and something that pretty much harms the future of a said company's direction or the kind of people that they attract going forwards.
It's sort of I don't know if it's dichotomy or is it a dilemma at all times on that basis, really, isn't it? That we probably most organisations would say that they want people who, can think outside the box and all the other cliches about being innovative and different. And yet, as we've said in the sort of intro, quite often we do end up recruiting people who are like us because there's a tendency to recruit people who we like, as again we said in that introduction.
That's true, but then what you identify, well, what is being identified as something they like, a lot of the times doesn't have any impact on delivery of the vision that they're working towards. And I think that's what the danger is, because you can have geniuses who aren't very social. You can have people who are very talented at what they do, but they might not tick certain boxes that make you go, okay, this person jumps out. I really like this person. They might be low energy where it comes to, again, socially or speaking up. But again, they're thinking people. There are different ways of approaching the solution that you're trying to get. And I think that's where we kind of have to say, hang on a second, can the person actually do the job? And it is hard when you're the person who has to make the decision. Of course, it would be, it'd be ideal if you could find someone who you could absolutely get along with and can simultaneously do the job. I'm just saying that a lot of the time what happens is that's all that's being considered.
Your audio just dropped out. Yeah, your audio just dropped out a couple of times then.
Really sorry about that.
So that last bit you said, a couple of bits dropped out to the point where I didn't really get what you were saying, and I'm just trying to think what started it.
Okay.
Can you go?
Yeah, I can restart my answer. It's fine.
Yeah, go.
Right. So a lot of what counts as likable qualities are things that have no kind of impact or any kind of they have no bearing on the company's mission or where they're trying to get to. And I understand from the point of view of being the person who has to make the decision that you would rather work with someone who's easy to get along with, easy to speak to, easy to communicate with. But we have to almost, ask ourselves the question, is this the best person to do the job? Can they actually do the job? Because you can have quiet geniuses who don't say much, but they're very good at application. You can have other people that probably aren't the most assertive in terms of making their voices heard in meetings, but they're thinking people. They're thinking of how to kind of address the problems that the organization is facing. And all I'm kind of saying is that a lot of the time it's getting lost in translation, that if somebody doesn't have the outwardly social component to their persona, that they're immediately almost written off because they're not as likable, and they use words like culture to kind of justify that. And this is where I'm like, you're missing out on some very talented and capable people, because the question that you should always be asking yourself is, can this person do the job?
There's quite a movement around the whole concept of introvert extrovert in organisations at the moment, in a similar sort of vein, as you say, which is that the sort of world seems to be set up for the people who sort of present as more extroverted and are therefore more sort of naturally noisy and out there, and quite sometimes, and this is a number of people are presenting, doing interviews, presentations and that sort of thing on this topic. They're saying exactly what you've just said, that sometimes the people who are quiet, reflective and thinking about things are probably much more useful in that moment, but you just don't always see that because of exactly what you've just said.
But then I feel like, hiring is one of those, it's one of those functions of employment or, in an organization, in a business, that a lot of people don't necessarily know how to hire properly. They don't know what they're looking for in terms, even when you look at these job specs that have like these overarching specifications of what you should be able to do. It's like, if this person existed, they wouldn't be looking for this job. You would be able to find them just like that, you know.
Yeah.
But so it's one of those things where I feel like a lot more consideration needs to be taken, and just a bit more care to think about, you know, who can do this job the best, or, you know, even looking at yourself and saying, what kind of manager or what kind of leader am I? And then understanding that, you know, there's an ideal person that you're looking for, but that person might not exist and still have the, you know, the technical or soft skills that you're looking for. As long as you have an appreciation of that, then I feel like your mind is open enough to find the right person who can do the job and maybe learn other soft skills, maybe learn to be more assertive. Maybe, you know, you can't expect this perfect person to just materialize and then rule out everyone else.
No. So what about the whole sort of initial thing about screening? Because there's a lot of automation around recruitment currently, and some of the people that I know who are looking for roles that maybe in the past they might have actually had a chance of being interviewed for, sort of don't end up getting seen because the words don't, I guess, jump out on their CV that are required by the automation system. But I don't know. In some ways, you can see that it could be a good thing. On the other side, it's a bad thing. What's your view on that?
So I joke around a lot and call it ATS and the attack of the clones, because it's almost as if for every job spec you have to have, you know, these very same keywords that pop up that the machine, and it can only read really normal Word documents or rich text files. It can't read PDFs. So if you have like this really well designed CV that, you know, just looks stunning and amazing, and you've gone the extra mile, this system does not know what to do with you. What it says is, where do the keywords, where are they? If it doesn't understand the layout, it just marks an X and said, nope, that's not it. We're not looking for this. And then that's it. You're gone. You're ruled out. And it's a tool. And I understand why the tool exists. It's like you say, it's screening. It's to get rid of, you know, the bad spelling, the chances, the people who are just applying, you know, scattergunning, applying for everything and not thinking about it. Okay, the name of the job title isn't mentioned in here. Rule that out. I understand that, but I just don't understand this 100% reliance on this system, as opposed to being willing to be a human and actually look at a CV. You're hiring a person. You can't ask a machine to do that for you. I just don't agree with it. But at the same time, like I said, if it's a very highly popular job that you're receiving many applications, I understand the need to have something in place to automatically filter certain types of application. But I just don't think it should be the be all and end all and the only thing people rely on.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things you sort of threw out as an example of criteria is spelling, and of course, people have different views on spelling, and some jobs need people to be able to spell properly. But actually, that whole thing around dyslexia and people not being able to spell and yet being brilliant for a particular job, I guess in some cases they wouldn't be using that as a criteria. But as you say, quite naturally, because you have the computerized system, some people who aren't able to spell in the same way as people who are, don't have dyslexia and so on, maybe sort of not considered, even though if you spoke to the recruiting people and said, could somebody who has dyslexia do this job, in lots of cases the answer would probably be yes.
Yeah, to be fair to the different ATS systems, I do want to make this point that I think they are made to understand slight spelling mistakes. But the problem is where it's tallying up the keywords. If you don't have the exact verbiage it's looking for, you're ruled out. And I think, yes, that's always going to be a definite disadvantage to anyone who has any kind of learning disadvantage or disability or has a problem elocuting that into one concise document. But then this is where it would be nice if people would pick up the phone or look at profiles or try to learn something about candidates instead of just off the bat dismissing them. And then, it's the thing of generic feedback of you've just been unsuccessful. We can't tell you why. It doesn't help anyone. And I think that's like a black eye from the recruitment industry, because they're missing out on many people who are diligent, conscientious people who will, add value to organization.
But then can we not say the same for the recruitment process in, even historically, if we're interviewing people often we're expecting people to be, personable and confident and have good communication skills. Not always when that's required in the job, but just because that seems like the sort of thing people should be good at. And again, that cuts out those people, as you say, that perhaps have skills in other areas, like, I don't know, really strong skill in data analysis, but not particularly, communication, sort of verbal communication, but can write brilliant reports or whatever. So our systems have always been flawed, haven't they?
But then you see, you make a good point there. But then the way that kind of large scale business is going now, they make exceptions for these people. They work around these people,
Right.
And I'm sure there are coders at Facebook who you couldn't have a conversation with because they can't break down things to a level that you would understand. But I'm sure they don't care about that because this is an ace coder who can do what we need them to do. And then you put them in a situation where they can feel comfortable and they can succeed. You have people who are very good with numbers, but not necessarily people. Well, you work with them to pick out an environment where that person is going to be able to thrive because actually they're very good at what they do. And it just boils down to, I think it's this, the level below that high level organizations. I think it's below there where everyone's very picky and very much looking to rule out people instead of trying to work with people, but they're trying to grow and get somewhere else. So it's strange. They see themselves as works in progress, but they want perfect people working for them. I don't understand that. It's a misnomer.
I read about an organisation recently who recruit everybody that applies to them. They just add them to a queue, and as the next job comes up, they get the job. And it's, I don't know, I think it's a cleaning job or something. It's something where they don't need specific skills. They can be trained easily on the job, but nevertheless, they don't, create a load of hoops for them to jump through. They literally have to make an application, and then they get hired at some stage. I thought it was really interesting. I mean, I don't suppose you could apply that in most organisations where you do need, different levels of knowledge and skill, but
of course.
But
then I was going to say that the thing about everything to do with business or even just being human or disseminating an image, a message, I should say, not an image, is that other people's mistakes open a window for someone who gets it to come through and do something differently. And then other people learn and adapt. And, I remember not too long ago, businesses didn't see a need for websites. And, now everybody has to have a website. Same thing when computers first came in, people never saw a need for them. Same thing with social media and, these other tools. At first people say, no, we don't need that. And then eventually they open their minds and they realize, oh my gosh, we were being left behind because we were not thinking ahead. I think with the hiring practices and processes, they need to start thinking ahead because where they're at right now is not a good place. Because like I said, too many people who have skills and have something to offer are being left firmly behind. And it's for no good reason because there's definitely a need for these people.
And I guess, recruiting, vacancy, there are less vacancies, the skills shortage and all that sort of thing. So we need to be as open as possible in our recruitment, I guess. But how do you think organisations should be recruiting to make sure that it isn't around hive mind? It's not about getting just people that we like, and it's not about, sort of limiting ourselves because we've ended up with people like us.
So I'm sure it will depend on the type of organisation and the type of skills they require. But I guess that the basic thing is just looking at these job specs for a start and just getting rid of these all-encompassing job specs that have like this, there's 50 things that you need to tick off. And it's like no person is ever going to have more than 35. Anyone that says they have above that is lying. But then, it's just get rid of just cut the fat. Get rid of anything that doesn't necessarily belong in a job spec. And then understand that you need different types of candidate, not just the same one all the time. If it's all the same, what you'll keep getting is every few years the same people will leave or the same people will move on. You won't get anything different. You're not going to break any new ground hiring the same person over and over and over. So I think, and again, it's easy to speak when you're looking from the outside in, but mostly just having, sitting down and, just kind of looking at your recruitment practices and keeping them up to date. And just realizing that some of the things that you're saying you require aren't actually necessary to the job. I guess that's the best way of, or the maybe one of the fairest ways. And then the rest of it comes down to who's actually doing the hiring and and painting the company in the best light, and you look at the people that represent the company in those capacities. If you're keeping tabs on that, I guess you end up by trial and error with a process that's a lot more like you can never call it fair, because like you say, not everyone that applies is going to get the job, but it could be more inclusive, I guess is a better term. And that's what people will be looking for, because at least if this one isn't for you, the idea is it shouldn't be so much of a slog to find a job that is for you. And just be decent human beings, giving feedback, and actually, if you see something that can be improved, I don't see where the issue is with communicating that to people.
I guess it's that thing about being really clear about what the absolute essentials are for a role as well, so that if you want a diverse thinker and that's vital for that role, then you have to understand that means you're going to have somebody who's a bit different and doesn't follow the crowd, in which case that, as you've said, is perhaps somebody who's perhaps harder to manage, isn't the usual type of person that you would be choosing through an interview process. But actually in fact, I was reading a book the other week, and it was somebody who had a brain an accident where she had brain damage years ago, and then she eventually got back into the workforce, and she applied to be an HR director for a big bank internationally. And the last question they asked her was, "Do you like people?" And she said no. And he went, "Oh, that's good. Right, you're hired."
Wow.
Interesting. A former HR person in the HR sort of space for the employee engagement thing, it made me laugh, because sometimes you sort of wonder if some of the HR people do actually like people, but then I started, but it does, yeah, exactly. But it also does beg the question, actually. Sometimes when you're in a sort of HR people role, if you absolutely love the whole people bit of it, as you say, I mean, flippantly we say it makes it easy to do the job, but how do you challenge people and make difficult decisions and perhaps restructure organisations and make people redundant, all that sort of stuff, in the right way, when if your love of people is so high, and I'm not saying you should hate people to be an HR person at all, but maybe that wasn't such a silly question for somebody going into that particular role in that particular organisation. You don't know, but it's interesting.
Maybe it's to shake up the department, keep them all honest,
Yeah, possibly so. And the other thing, I keep sort of remembering things I've read recently. I also I listened to a podcast, and Marcus Buckingham, who's ex-Gallup, was talking about culture. So going back to what we said at the beginning about culture, and he talked about in organisations, talk about the culture in this organisation, and he said that is sort of complete rubbish. He said really culture is within people and teams. So you can have like thousands of people in your organisation and 100 different cultures, because it's about that team that work together day in, day out.
Agreed.
That might be different to somewhere else, in which case having one way or one type of person to recruit wouldn't fit with that either, would it?
I agree, because I was going to say that when with reference to culture, it's not as if, well, depending on the size of the organization, it's not usual for upper management to be mixing it with kind of front end staff. So how can we gauge that the culture is the same exactly? And you're right, it that's what I'm saying. Sometimes it ends up being just coded language. It's just a way of keeping out the people that they don't necessarily want to be working with. It's not necessarily to fit our culture. And it's like, well, what does culture actually mean? Can you define it? And if so, why isn't it on your job spec? That wasn't on there. You didn't define your culture on your job spec. And then they'll say things like they have a friendly team, and there's friendly should be, so the opposite of friendly would be hostile. As long as you're not hostile, potentially you're friendly. So it's kind of, I have, culture is one of those words when I come across in employment terms that sort of gets me to shake my head and roll my eyes.
Yeah.
That and the term leverage, I think it's just overused and it doesn't really mean much.
I don't like pivot. So just reflect on that. What we're really saying actually is we need to make our lives difficult as recruiting managers. We need to potentially recruit people who we maybe don't like and we don't want to manage and we find difficult to manage, potentially, in order to create that diversity within our team.
No, I'm saying the underlining factor here should be competent. Can they do the job? if the answer is yes, but they come with some, you have things you might have to work around or finesse or help them with. I'm just saying it shouldn't be seen as, oh my gosh, this is absolutely a non-starter. It's too hard. No, it should be like, they have the competencies. Is there a way that we can work with this person? Obviously, while keeping an eye out for your ideal candidate, which everyone has, and there will be some amount of preconceived ideas of who you should be hiring. And, we're human beings, so we will tend to follow some form of pattern. But I'm just saying, the more you kind of look for these perfect people, it's the worse you make the recruiting process for everyone else. And that's kind of what job seekers resent. It's because there's no parity, and a lot of times they're not just applying just for the sake of it. A lot of times people have considered what they bring to an organization before making their application. So I think it's only fair on the other side of it that organizations actually, look closer and say, well, can they do the job? And if so, then, you should at least have them in consideration.
Interesting. And I guess, the other side to that argument is the organisations where they say that they recruit for cultural fit, and then they worry about giving people the skills and the competence sort of after. And I guess we could have done a whole show of that and argued the point positively, in that way as well, where we've done sort of the opposite. So it's, I suppose, an ongoing debate. The last couple of minutes of the show, where has your interest in this come? Is there a story there?
So essentially, I use LinkedIn quite a bit. It's become one of my favorite platforms to look at, because I get to communicate with people from loads of different industries with lots of different skills, and that's all kind of exciting and interesting, and a chance for me to see different type of content. But then when it comes to recruitment, employment, job seeking, it pretty much reads the same all the time. So it kind of, it made me kind of sit back and go, because a lot of what is being shared on the platform are these platitudes of this is what you need to do, and, go this extra mile. And it's always putting the onus on the job seeker. And I'm like, hang on a second. These people are skilled, they're conscientious, they're hardworking, and I can see examples of what they're capable of, and they're doing everything to put themselves in the best possible light. Then they go to a recruitment function, and then they're pretty much being told that, no, it just doesn't work. And it's for these like really flimsy reasons with no kind of logic behind them. And that almost like hurt my feelings, because I was like, well, if I was in their position, I'd be very, very angry. And then what they get is these, people using the platform to tell them, oh, no, this isn't it. You can be doing 150% more to make yourself hireable. And a lot of what they're telling you to do is not be yourself. And I'm like, well, that's not great advice. So someone needs to say something about this. Someone needs to speak up. And a lot of the time, again, when you use that platform and you say something that not everyone else is going with, it could go one of two ways. But, fortunately for me, when I say something, it's wrapped in logic, or it's wrapped in, clear examples where you can see that, look, this hasn't been happening. And if it was happening this way, I wouldn't need to say anything. So that's kind of what's kind of prompted me towards speaking about this stuff. Care for job seekers.
Lovely. I think that's a great line to end on. So thanks, Jay. Thanks for joining me.
No problem at all. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for having me.
We can almost have had the argument, the complete opposite argument for the whole show as well. It's interesting, isn't it? It's one of those dilemmas.
Yeah. And, like I said, I think it's a lot of the time you have people that can't necessarily relate because they've always been in HR, they've always been in recruitment. So they're coming at this from a secure position. And it's like people that are looking for jobs are in insecure position. You should be trying to, find ways to see if you can understand and help these people, even if it means that whatever you're recruiting for at that moment, you can't help them with. You can do other things as a human being to say, look, this is the path that you probably need to pay more attention to get the result you want. I don't see what the issue is with that, like, being human back, where it's kind of like, oh, we get so many applications that we're just allowed to send out this generic something to everyone that says nothing and helps no one. I just think that's really bad.
Yeah. Well, particularly as you said, as we mentioned that, skill shortage and the sort of low unemployment, it'll come round, because companies have to compete for the best people, and then it is about treating people better, isn't it? But I guess it just takes a while for that to permeate.
And I think what's going to happen is companies are going to do away with their relationships with recruitment companies, and then we'll see how they feel when they're on that up when they're out with everyone else looking for jobs.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
Joan. Have a good day.
Okay. Have a good evening. Yeah, and you. Okay. Bye.
Bye.